Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan at MS. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 29th of September 2024. This is a military aid and geopolitics news video all in one. We're just going to start though with a couple of incidents that have happened since I did my hits and losses video that is taking an awful long time to sort out. Large-scale Russia in Bernal in Russia. A furniture factories on fire, flames covering more than 1,000 square meters. According to Russian Emergencies Ministry, there are no people inside the building and the cause of the fire is still unknown. It's a big old fire, and my goodness, these are happening very frequently. In talking about fires, there is a large fire, it seems, in in Russia's Rostov region, sparked by a drone crash in the Milyutinsky district. Spread over at least 20 hectares. The regional governor stated that the efforts to extinguish the fire have been hindered by strong winds, and a helicopter has been deployed to assist. So, unfortunately, more concerns, more ramifications of war. Often fires are started due to drones being shot down or munitions hitting out in the wild. This is, I believe, close to a target. So it could be just ramifications of striking at that target in Rostov. Rostov was the site of many drone strikes last night, or attempted drone strikes. Milarova Air Base, as well as further out to the east. Okay, now moving on to military aid. Not too much to report. Asked whether Ukraine would be authorized to use Western weapons to strike deep into Russia, Antony Blinken, the Foreign Secretary, the Secretary of State, said the administration and partners are now studying the details of the plan and, if necessary, considering additional actions to help the Ukrainians achieve victory. So it's still on the table. No decision has been made. Then you hear this. Zelensky's spokesperson has said Russians will be the first to know about authorization to strike deep into Russia, quote, and then an official announcement will be made, he said, implying that retaliatory strikes against Russia will come first. So it's exactly how it should be: hit first and then say, oh yeah, we got permission later. Although just the longer you wait to be able to do something like that, the more time you're giving the Russians to be able to move equipment out of the way and targets. You can start putting air defense systems in place against targets in that range. Okay, Switzerland's neutrality-based restrictions on re-exporting arms to Ukraine have prompted several European countries to avoid Swiss-made weapons, prompting Swiss debates on policy changes and defense industry future. So Euromaidan Press has an article on this. I've talked about this a number of times previously, that neutrality does not work with an arms export industry. So you can hold to the strong moral position of national neutrality. I think neutrality is a problem. I think you are making a moral statement that not getting involved is more important than helping. So the very simple analogy I always give is, if you look at old Doris across the road getting the crap kicked out of her by a mugger who's trying to steal her handbag, and you sit there and go, can't help, sorry, I'm neutral. That itself, I think, is morally problematic. I think you are morally obligated to help her as a member of society, as a member of the global community. You're obligated to help people in need, and I think being neutral, I think, has moral issues. But actually, that's a separate argument to the bizarre position of having, or hoping to have, an arms export industry whereby you stipulate you cannot re-export the goods that you are sold by Switzerland to countries that may end up getting involved in war, etc., etc. And Ukraine desperately need an awful lot of stuff that has either been produced in Switzerland or was to do with Switzerland in some way. This has then meant, and I said this earlier, that you can't have a competitive arms export industry and neutrality stipulations. Those two things don't go together. So either you change your neutrality rules or you give up on doing arms exports, because you will not, all things remaining equal. So you're producing a gun, right? And someone else is producing an equivalent gun, right? And assuming they're the same sort of price and do the same sort of thing, you will buy it from someone else because you won't have stipulations on re-export. Which means if I buy this from you, if I buy this from someone else other than Switzerland, I have a better chance of being able to resell it later in the day. And I'm going to want to do that because that gives us more economic options with whatever we buy. So you will see this happen. Exactly what was predicted, which is that the Swiss arms industry is now being bypassed as people are buying from other vendors, because they recognise that you have more options at the end of the day. And so therefore Switzerland and its arms industry are having to go back to the drawing board to work out what to do about this. Do you give up on the arms industry? Okay, fair enough. If neutrality is more important, give up on the arms industry. Or do you try and maintain a viable export industry but mess around with your rules on neutrality? We'll have to see. Lithuania has handed over a new batch of military aid to Ukraine. According to their MOD, the package includes material and technical equipment, ammunition, laptops, etc., etc. So range of stuff. Lithuania is still remaining a staunch supporter of Ukraine. Now, this is something that I've been talking about a lot recently. So, quote, Russia has significantly increased production of Shahed 136s, according to the Institute for Science and International Security. For example, the Alabuga company was supposed to supply 6,000 drones to Russia by September 2025. That would be, well, if you talk, I don't know when that was from, but from now that would be 500 a month. Well, actually, no, it wouldn't be under 500 a month, but many hundreds a month. But it's exceeded its schedule, having already delivered more than 6,000 drones by the end of August 2024. So one must assume that 6,000 drones by the end of August 2024. If that is from August 2023, then that is going to be something around 400 drones a month. And that would explain why we are seeing that many drones being sent into Ukraine by the Russians at the moment. It's just absolutely, they are indefatigable when it comes to sending these drones. Now, people have asked me, well, why haven't Ukraine targeted those drone manufacturing facilities? So the Alabuga plant was struck a couple of times on one night with aeroplane drones, these kind of light aircraft that have been turned into drones. One of those landed between the dormitory building and another building, or it might be in between two dormitory buildings. They weren't hugely successful, but they tried to hit that place. I would imagine, surely it's got to be target number one. The Russians would know that, and they would be putting electronic warfare and air defenses in there for sure. But I would be absolutely trying to take this place out. It is quite a long way away, I think, if I remember correctly. And yeah, they employ lots of college kids from the nearby technical college, and also people from Africa. They put a lot of effort into producing drones there. I think 24/7, etc., etc. That's why they've got dormitories there and whatnot. Okay, geopolitically speaking, Max24 reports that Ukraine will become a member of NATO after joining the EU. That's a statement from the president of Finland, Alexander Stubb. Quote, first security agreements will be agreed with Ukraine, which are currently concluded with more than 20 countries. Then Ukraine should agree on a bilateral security guarantees with countries such as the USA, Great Britain or France, after which Ukraine can become a member of the EU and only then a member of NATO. I guess that's pretty consistent with what we know about accession to these organisations. I think that they won't be joining the EU anytime before 2030, realistically. So NATO is going to be further off, and that's why they're working so hard to get these bilateral security agreements that kind of replace Article 5 in NATO. But the problem is, so they've done that one with Joe Biden and his administration, but it would appear that would become defunct given a different president in place, so particularly Trump. So if Trump took over in November, January, then that bilateral security agreement goes out the window. And of course, that's an incredibly important one. So you want to be doing that with an overarching network like the EU or NATO that isn't so vulnerable to the vagaries of political winds in individual countries. So Alexander Stubb again here saying, well, let's listen to him. Oops.
That's when you attribute. Yeah. And when you do all of this in these 3 steps, you have to be in close cooperation and coordination with your allies. Yeah. Because if Russia does the same hybrid attack on the same day with us And same with Estonia, we have to react exactly the same way. Otherwise, they will have won the day. And the same goes also for public discourse.
It's really good to hear premiers of different countries talking about how hybrid warfare is as important as they say it is. When you have cyber warfare attacks and information attacks on countries, we need to respond. We also need to respond in the same way as other such countries and act as a community against Russia in this way, in a kind of Article 5 sort of way that you would expect in terms of a conventional attack. This gets onto the discussion as to what is the trigger for hybrid warfare to trigger Article 5. Like, where is that tipping point where actually that's warfare? You have debilitated our IT network in all these hospitals. People are dying because you've attacked it with your cyber warfare. That is an attack on our nation. That is an attack on our nation, and we are a NATO member. So therefore, what is everyone going to do about this? How does that trigger Article 5? Is that, where is that trigger point? But yeah, so good that he's being strong there. Now, we have had Giorgia Meloni receiving a gift of Elon Musk. And this is interesting because Giorgia Meloni is the Italian premier. She is also a staunch supporter of Ukraine, a very strong supporter, and she's super right wing. This is an interesting mix because she's in a coalition government with two other super right wing coalition parties who are pro Russia, much more so. So you have got Matteo Salvini, who is, and Silvio Berlusconi's party, although he's now passed away. So those two parties are much more friendly with, and Matteo Salvini as a deputy prime minister in Italy is always waxing lyrical about Russia and Russian appeasement. So she has a very difficult position there, but also in the grand scheme of things, often with that kind of right-wing government, like you see in, say, Hungary, you would expect them, as you see with the other coalition partners there, you expect a right-wing government to be much more in line with the nationalist sort of Russian government. But actually, there are certain I'm not talking about the centre-right here, so some of the Nordic countries have gone centre-right and are very much anti-Russia. Italy's just a really interesting one. And so she's a sort of anti-immigration leader where someone like Elon Musk would be like super happy with her. But actually her views on Ukraine are completely different to Elon Musk. So after Elon Musk handed Giorgia Meloni an Atlantic Council Award in New York City this past week, the Italian Prime Minister used the moment to state clearly that Ukraine must win and that the West, if it still believes in democracy and dignity, must help. Voices like Meloni's can help snap so many people out of the propaganda coma that prevents them from standing with Ukraine, says JP Lindsley. Maybe Elon, who has castigated Ukraine and who has ignored Ukraine's great successes, will wake up. The point is that it's really useful when you get leaders who are positioned in the way that Meloni is, that say things that she does.
We defend Ukraine, for we have known the chaos of a world in which the law of the strongest prevails. The time we live in requires us to choose what we want to be and what path we want to take. We can continue to fool the idea of the decline of the West. We can surrender to the idea that our civilization has nothing more to say or no more routes to chart. Or we can remember who we are. President Reagan once said, above all, we must realize that no arsenal or no weapon in the arsenal of the world is so formidable as the will and the moral courage of free men and women. It is a weapon our adversaries in today's world do not have. We defend Ukraine, for we have known the chaos of a world in which the law of the strongest prevails.
We invite you to follow our
That is absolutely brilliant, right? So really good for Giorgia Meloni to stand up in that context and say that. Now, talking about Elon Musk, it's worth noting this, and I say this because I use Twitter a hell of a lot. As you know, it's a great aggregator of information, of all the sources, of all the news, media sources, everything, like in one place, brilliant. But it is also run by Elon Musk, who is a prime plum. Now, he is looking to get rid of the block and mute features, which means that you can no longer decide not to listen to people you don't want to. I have someone, for example, who kind of stalks me from my previous writing. He was banned from a previous platform I was writing at, and he, for some reason, has it in for me, even though like he followed me for ages and then just went weird. And anyway, I don't want to listen to him like be abusive to me. I don't want to listen to that. And now it appears that Elon Musk is going to be, and this has long been on the cards, by the way, but he's going to roll that back because in order that a platform fully embraces free speech, the block and mute features will be removed from Twitter this December, as they are a hindrance to the First Amendment. So I don't have a right to close my ears. I don't have a right not to hear someone. They have a right to shout in my ears. They have a right to come round and just shout in my face. And I can't have a right not to hear that stuff. So at what point is that acceptable? And then when you amplify certain voices above other voices, then that isn't a platform that embraces free speech. That is a platform that promotes an agenda. Like when your voice, Elon Musk, your entire your handle here and everything you say is artificially promoted onto everyone's feeds. And that is not free speech. That is speech that is freer for some people than others. And as we know from leaked coding, as I've said a million times, you also place Ukraine news in the same category as disinformation, and therefore it gets downgraded. It gets de-amplified, right? So that is not free at all. You give yourself and people who agree with your agenda much greater amplification on this platform than others, and that disadvantages Ukraine and it disadvantages the truth. So this is a real issue that needs to be dealt with, and it kind of feeds into the public discourse in the US to the point where I know this might be kind of divisive for some, but this is kind of how many people feel it at the moment. That you've got Trump, Russia, Harris, Ukraine, and it's become divisive. And it's become divisive because of people like Elon Musk who have amplified that division. And so therefore it's really good to hear Giorgia Meloni, who sits firmly on the right, some would say far right, in that she is being strong in her support for Ukraine, because that would go against this kind of populist right of Trump, siding like the populist right of Hungary's Orban siding with Russia, and everyone else siding with Ukraine. So that would be, well, not everyone else, because you get the far left in places like Germany, where you've got the far left and far right siding with Russia for probably a little bit different reasons. And then you've got the centre left, the centre, and the centre right, usually siding with Ukraine and the kind of status quo, the rule of law, etc., etc. Just, yeah, it's definitely a worry. Now, what's interesting in this context, particularly the American political context, where you have quite often you get MAGA Trumpists going, okay, we're not a fan of Ukraine, and by extension, therefore, implicitly support Russia, but we won't admit it so loudly. But what we will say is that China's a real enemy. China's a real enemy. And the acceptance that North Korea are the enemy. And I've long said that one of the ways to move the needle of support in MAGA republicanism away from Russia towards Ukraine is to show the clear connections between Russia and China, Russia and North Korea. And once you say, well, if you accept that China are the bogeyman for you, that you see them as a big threat to humanity, to yourselves, to America, then okay, you need to accept that actually formally with BRICS, but informally with China's support of Russia, then China is a shadow of Russia, and therefore it's inconsistent to be against China whilst also being against Ukraine. Now, this is maybe materializing a bit more explicitly with what North Korea has just come out and said. So North Korea have criticized the US military aid to Ukraine, calling it a remarkable mistake. Okay, so Reuters has this article that's just come out on the back of Kim Jong-un, the dictator there, his sister, saying some pretty remarkable things. So North Korea says US military aid to Ukraine is an incredible mistake. Kim Yo-jong, the powerful sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, said Washington is escalating the Ukraine conflict and driving all of Europe to the brink of a nuclear war. The United States and the West should not dismiss or underestimate Russia's serious warning, Kim said in a statement published by state news agency KCNA. Quote, are the United States and the West really able to handle the consequences as they recklessly play with fire against Russia, which is a nuclear superpower, she said. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned he could use nuclear weapons if Russia was hit with missiles and would consider any assault against it that is backed by a nuclear power to be a joint attack. Helping Zelensky continue a military adventure is a dangerous and irresponsible gamble, and announcing the new $8 billion in military aid was, quote, an incredible mistake and foolish act, Kim said. Kim, who holds a position in North Korea's ruling Workers' Party, often makes statements on Pyongyang's position on political and security matters believed to be authorized by the country's supreme leader. North Korea and Russia have dramatically upgraded their ties in the past year, with their leaders meeting twice and agreeing on a comprehensive strategic partnership. That includes a mutual defense pledge. So this could go either way, right? So you could get people going, okay, right, I understand that Russia really are the bad guys. Look, they're hanging around with North Korea, who are clearly and obviously bad guys. But the problem is Trump goes, oh, I have a really great relationship with Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un, you know, that love letter that was sent from Un to Trump that Trump holds dear, in fact, is kept in the documents cases that he's not entitled to keep. Anyway, that's another problem. But he has these kind of falling relationships with Xi Jinping, Kim Jong-un, Viktor Orban, and of course Vladimir Putin. And so I think some of his supporters could either go, okay, let's support Ukraine a bit more because, yeah, Russia are obviously in the wrong orbit here. Or you go down the route that, oh my goodness, North Korea have signed a pledge that's similar to Article 5, that if Russia is attacked, then North Korea can come in and aid Russia. Then this is going to start nuclear war. So actually we need to de-escalate. So really we should be stopping support of Ukraine even more. Even though you got North Korea, you got this axis of evil that is so explicitly emerging from this war. Yeah. North Korea has shipped at least 16,500 containers of weapons to Russia since September last year, and Russia has fired missiles from those shipments against Ukraine, the United States has said. Both North Korea and Russia deny any illegal arms trade. Of course they do. But it is then to go back to how the Republican Party reacts to this, and this possibly represents, like I was saying, like a schism in thought, and that schism exists in the Republican Party, where you get Reagan Republicans and MAGA Republicans, Trumpists, having a completely different approach to America's role in global society, in the geopolitical landscape. So I think this kind of view is much more defensible, but this is kind of your Reagan Republican view from a Republican here.
Minister, and they signed this mutual.
By the way, this is Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg. Keith Kellogg is retired, but he was one of the guys who penned the Trump plan, which was if Ukraine doesn't come to the table, they won't get any weapons, and if Russia doesn't come to the table, Ukraine would get even more weapons. And there is some validity to that plan, but it was also a little bit appeasing to Russia. So Kellogg is an interesting one. I wouldn't say he's the greatest supporter of Ukraine, but he is in a Trump orbit, and he is writing potential plans for Trump's approach to the Ukraine war.
And Shoigu is defense minister, and they signed this Mutual Defense Act, which it's going to benefit both. So it's got regional implications and global implications as well. So what's happened is what Russia's going to get out of the deal is munitions for their fight against Ukraine. North Korea has already provided them over 2 million 152 millimeter howitzer rounds, which allows the Russians to outgun the Ukrainians almost 10 to 1. Plus, they're giving them all the other technology that they need to fight with. Plus, they've given them over 10,000 shipping containers of munitions. And what what Korea gets out of it, it kind of reduces their isolationism in the region. And it solidified this axis of evil, the axis of China and Iran and North Korea and Russia. And part of the frustration we've all got to feel is, what are we going to do about it, or what is our response going to be? You know, this and Shogun.
And I'd like to hear the rest of that, really. But, you know, what would the response be? I mean, Jane Kidd sees that as, after 10 years acting as a conduit for every possible Russian disinformation narrative, Fox News is finally figuring out that Russia is not a friend. I don't know if you could go that far, but it would be nice to really get an explicit communication from pundits on Fox News that Russia are the bad guys here, and they're being fed munitions by Iran, and they're being fed munitions by North Korea, and indeed fed munitions, really, when we're talking about maybe armored vehicles and military drones, by China, right? This discussion needs to be taking place on sites like, on news shows like Fox News. Really important that. Anyway, let me know what you think. That's enough from me for today. Take care, certainly with this video. Take care and I'll speak soon. Please tune in to the live I'm doing later with Kiwi former mayor of Tauranga, Tenby Powell, who is in Ukraine doing incredible charity work. He's quite famous in New Zealand for doing that. My sister sort of alerted me to him. She actually lives, of all places, in Tauranga. And yeah, it's great to be able to talk to him. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak soon.